Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is August 26, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. Deal or no deal? That is the question for today's podcast. Right on cue, President Donald J. Trump took to Twitter early this morning to calm the markets as best he could, given the volatility that we experienced last week. We said just on yesterday's Week Ahead podcast, what we were going to be looking forward to this week is Donald Trump coming out to Twitter, making comments to get the stock market to rally because of that massive sell-off that we saw on Friday, given the further escalation between the United States and China. So Donald Trump did not disappoint. He has now become highly predictable in this regard. The stock market is his baby. He does not want to see it drop off. He goes into a panic. He goes into a tizzy. I believe the Tweetstorm that we saw on Friday was a breakdown. The president, I believe, it's no question, is under a lot of stress. But I think we saw a public breakdown of this president just being overwhelmed by reality. I believe he is bitten off more than he can chew with this trade war. I don't believe it's the best thing for the United States, especially not through tariffs. But that's a story and a discussion for another time. We've most definitely had it here. But Donald Trump saw the futures trading. He saw the Dow. He saw the NASDAQ. He saw the S&P all down. The Dow was down a couple hundred points, I think as low as 300 points in early morning futures trading. Well, he didn't like it because it would have been a continuation of Friday's massive sell-off of 2 to 3 percentage points. So he did what he could do best. He took to Twitter and he said, well, you know what? We received phone calls from China and they want to get back to the negotiating table. Can you believe it, folks? Can you believe it? I don't believe it because we've been told this same song and dance for over a year. Is there a trade deal? No. There's further escalation. But nevertheless, these markets, as irrational and as crazy as they are, believed this nonsense once again. They continued to believe the boy who cries wolf. My question is, when do markets stop believing the boy who cries wolf? Because once this happens, the markets are in a lot of trouble. The credibility of the president himself and the office of the presidency of the United States is in a lot of trouble. And I don't know where the bottom will be. And I don't know how long it will take for trust and confidence to be restored in the marketplace and in the president himself and in the office of the presidency itself. These are big issues. So the markets, the futures, Dow was down 300 points following this tweet that everything's fine and China wants to come back to the negotiating table. We saw a huge reversal with the Dow closing up over 200 points. So we basically saw a 500-point swing. So the S&P, the Dow, the NASDAQ, and the Russell 2000, the small cap index, were all up 1% or greater. Same thing with the Dow Jones Transports, and the New York Stock Exchange gained 0.8%. Oil whipsawed a little bit back and forth, but nothing fancy, nothing exaggerated, nothing to write home about. WTI is trading at $54 a barrel. Brent is at $59. Gold is trading at $1,530 a barrel. It was on more of a little bit of a rally. Given the news from Donald Trump, it pulled back slightly, but was still able to eke out some small gains today. Silver is trading at $17.67. Quite the rally with these precious metals. Again, for those of you who may be joining for the first time, I believe that the precious metals markets are in the midst, the very early stages of a bull market run. Any type of dip, any type of pullback is an opportunity to accumulate. Physical gold and silver, you can own the ETFs, you can own some miners. Be diversified because I believe these are good plays. I believe this offers diversification for your portfolio, and I just think with these central banks the world over continuing to print money, continuing to lower interest rates, this is a new easing cycle the world over. Now, what the Federal Reserve does, we're going to be focused on this coming up over the next couple of weeks as they are set to meet September 17th and 18th. But we believe they're going to be in the midst of a new easing cycle. So this does not bode well for the markets. I know most people think otherwise. They think that's going to be a great boon for the markets, that if the Federal Reserve comes to the quote-unquote rescue again, that everything's going to be fine. monetary policy is not a panacea. It's not. In fact, it's the cause. It's the cause of a lot of our problems. It is the disease. The U.S. 10-year Treasury is at 1.55%, so little changed from the other day, but still very low. Markets are anticipating, of course, slower economic growth here in the United States and globally. Markets are also anticipating that the Federal Reserve is going to cut interest rates, so that is reflected in these lower Treasury yields that we continue to see. We also continue to see an inversion between the 2-year and the 10-year Treasury note. Again, a sign that predicts very accurately oncoming recessions. The VIX, the volatility index, lost about 3 percentage points and is now trading at $19.32. So the main topic of today's discussion, of course, is deal or no deal. Why does the president continue to do this? Why do the markets continue to believe the president when he comes out and blatantly manipulates these markets? And the reason I say blatantly is because the president made the claim that China called the United States and said, we want to come back to the negotiating table. We want to continue these negotiations. Well, what does China say? They say this didn't happen. Didn't happen. Who said this was going to happen? Me. I did, months ago. You're going to have the president saying one thing, and then you're going to have the Chinese saying another, and then it's going to be a toss-up in the air as to who the markets ultimately believe. And I believe a lot of this is reflected in the fact that we have been range-bound in these markets for quite a while. And it's been a volatility that we haven't seen in quite a while. But it is also something that we predicted here on the Capital News that we were likely to begin witnessing and experiencing. And that's exactly what we are experiencing, is a lot of volatility. The markets, when they trade like this, in these volatile ranges, are destined to break out one way or the other. I believe we are more likely to see a breakout to the downside, because I don't see a whole bunch of tailwinds that are going to propel this market to make higher highs. I just don't see it. It would be complete lunacy, complete insanity. But nevertheless, that's the world in which we live, so it's possible. I just don't say that it's probable. I say it's more probable that we get another sell-off, because I think a lot of people in the market are starting to get antsy. I think people are starting to get concerned. These markets run off of trust and confidence. Period. End of story. We have nearly now $17 trillion in negative yielding debt. Okay? $17 trillion. It was only a couple months ago we said it was $10 trillion. Now it's $17 trillion. And it's only going to get worse. Because that's a bad thing, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a good thing. So it's only going to get worse, especially as central banks of the world over continue to ease policy, continue to move their rates into deeper negative territory, and we're likely to see further rounds of quantitative easing, quite possibly from the Federal Reserve itself, but most definitely from the ECB, the European Central Bank. And we'll know more about that in a couple weeks as well in September. So Donald Trump has his baby. The stock market sold off violently last week, and this has been a continuation because it was only a couple weeks ago. We saw an 800-point decline on the Dow, which was a loss of over 3%. Last Friday, we saw market sell off again, 2 to 3%. Donald Trump didn't like it. He's over there in France meeting with the G7. They're trying to calm him down. Listen, Mr. President, we don't need a trade war. This we got to de-escalate, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't care. He doesn't care what they have to say. Is he going to be over there and play nice? Sure, that's what he does. He plays nice. He plays the tough guy here at home. He plays the tough guy on Twitter. Then when he's over there in a foreign country or face-to-face with a lot of these leaders, he just sort of sits back in a chair and says, just whatever. Okay. So he was going to make sure that the markets did their best to rally today. And this is what he did. He comes out and says China wants to make a deal. China says, we never said we want to come back to the negotiating table. We still don't have 100% confirmation that the Chinese are still going to be traveling to Washington, D.C. next month to continue these trade talks. I don't know what's going to be resolved. We have two world leaders, President Donald Trump and President Xi. They're both playing the strongman character. So neither one of them wants to lose face. Neither one of them wants to look like the weakling. So it's becoming more and more difficult to come up with some sort of compromise. We also have the president continuing to say that the only way that the United States is going to strike a deal with China is if it's a better deal for the United States than it is for China. So why would China come to the table and actually agree to something that would be better for the U.S. as opposed to China? I don't think they would. Could this be some sort of negotiating tactic from the president? Perhaps. Could this be just the president talking out loud, thinking out loud? Perhaps. But you still have to ask yourself the question, are you going to make a deal with somebody where you know you're going to get the short end of the stick on it? No. Why would you? You wouldn't. So the fact that the president comes out and continuously says this, because this isn't something new, the president has been saying this for the past few months now, that the deal that needs to be struck has to be better for the United States than it is for China. Why? Because according to the president, the Chinese have been ripping us off for 20, 30 years. And now these scales have to balance back out, which means the deal now has to be better for the United States, presumably for the next 10 to 20 years. So it has to be balanced out. China's not going to go for this. You wouldn't go for this. So we are now playing a big game of chicken. And the further along we go, the further along we are in the 2020 presidential campaign. So now, if we thought, or if you were thinking that China was just going to sit back, cross their arms, and say, you know what? Donald Trump is in the midst of a presidential election. We're just going to wait him out because he might lose. He might lose. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the Chinese are going to be meddling in our elections, just like they did last time, just like they did the time before and the time before that, just like the Russians do, just like the Germans do, just like the Iranians and the North Koreans do, just like we meddle in everybody else's elections. This cycle, that cycle, every other cycle. It's a big joke. If you think that the United States does not meddle in other affairs, you're brain dead. So, this is unfortunately par for the course. I, for one, am getting sick and tired of the boy who cried wolf. This is in-your-face market manipulation. Nobody calls him out on this, and I don't understand why. There are no politicians that call him out on this. The mainstream media doesn't even call him out on this. And it boggles my mind. Because the President of the United States does not have the power and authority to do this. Nor should he. Nor should he. The other thing that is of concern to me, and I'm going to bring this up again because it's important to me, is when the President, during his Twitter storm on Friday, was saying, well, I hereby order U.S. companies to begin looking elsewhere. Well, of course, talking about China, leaving China, moving away from China, more likely trying to get them to come back here to the United States to open up manufacturing facilities and the like. And of course, the president actually knew about an obscure 1977 law, basically an Economics Emergency Act law. Now, I highly doubt that Donald J. Trump happened to be aware of this law. But you know what it tells me? It tells me that he asked his team, he probably asked his lawyers to do some research on this. And again, I'm fine with this whole wargaming situation of understanding your options in these trade negotiations and just what to do with China at large here. So I don't hold that against the president for asking the question. If he actually goes forward with it, then I'm going to have a problem with it. Because this is not the United States of America. He would have to declare an emergency, basically, in order for this to take place, in order for him to actually have the authority to order American companies to begin looking or leaving China. Now, I also believe, if I have the proper understanding of this law, that this would really only affect new business that would be going to China. He could stop it, pull them away. Companies that are already there, businesses that is already underway, I do not believe the president would have authority to do something. Although that doesn't stop presidents, including this one, from overreaching their powers, which is another problem that we have faced in this country for far too long. Overreach by the executive branch, overreach by Congress, overreach by the courts. We have a huge problem here in this country with power. It's too big. It's too big, and it's concentrated in the hands of too few, which is exactly what was not supposed to happen in the United States of America. And that is in large part by why we have Donald Trump as the president of the United States, because the people are getting sick and tired of this. People say, we got to shake up the system. We can't give this to Hillary Clinton. We know how she's going to operate. Maybe we'll take the risk on this guy, Donald Trump. That was my logic in a lot of this, and some comments that he made regarding the Federal Reserve. Now, of course, he's the president. He wants these bubbles to continue. He wants them to continue with low interest rates. He wants them to continue with quantitative easing. I can't stand for it. I also cannot stand for the lies and the exaggeration, the boy who cries wolf tactics, the market manipulation, the obsession with the economy and the stock market. Where is draining the swamp? It is non-existent. He isn't even draining the kiddie pool. We have the military-industrial complex making record profits. We have the banking sector making record profits. We have the president making deals and basically calling them great deals with the Democrats because they increased the debt ceiling. So we are now going to have trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. This isn't what I voted for. This is not fiscal conservatism. This is not sound fiscal policy. This is not calling for sound monetary policy. This is the swamp very much alive, very much well. We have trade wars that are taking place the world over, not just between the United States and other countries. We also talk about the differences between South Korea and Japan. And that doesn't seem to be de-escalating anytime soon either. I mean, there have been some slight little pullbacks, but nothing major, nothing great on that front either. So this is global, and this is reminiscent sort of the 1930s. A lot of countries are starting to look for protectionism. Remember, 1930s, the Great Depression? You see why I call this time very, very serious? You see why I'm saying we're going to have some sort of major pullback, that it's likely that we're going to have some sort of major pullback in the equities markets, and that, more broadly speaking, forget the markets, that we're going to have a recession, if not another depression. Okay, history repeats, and if it doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So we are seeing the same type of things that we witnessed 80, 90 years ago. And of course, unless you're understanding history, you're not going to be aware of this. You're just going to think this time is different. And when you hear that statement, this time is different, that's when you know it's time to run for the hills. It's just human nature. The pendulum swings one way, it comes back the other. It always overshoots. It goes too high sometimes, it goes too low others. That's what happens. So we just got to be prepared. You got to be diversified. You have to have a plan. You got to stick with it. You have to go through the analysis. That's what we're here for at the Capital News. That's where we talk about economic numbers that are deteriorating, and they continue to deteriorate. The jobs report that came out from the government. 500,000 fewer jobs have been created. 500,000 fewer jobs have been created than previously reported. That's not small potatoes. We have German business morale falling to near 7-year lows. Well, what was 7 years ago? That was the debt crisis in the Eurozone. Not a good time. Not a good time. That's when Greece was collapsing. That's when you had to deal with the pigs nations, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. And those guys are going to be front news again. Believe me when I tell you. Now we're at the end of August already. In a couple months, we're going to have to deal with Brexit. Once again, front and center. Because this problem hasn't gone away. So it's just on the back burner. Just wait till it becomes front page news again. And it will. And it doesn't matter necessarily what's going to happen. It's going to be the trust and confidence in the system. It's going to be the volatility that is created in the midst of all of this chaos, all of this uncertainty. A new government being formed in Italy. You have the Hong Kong protests. You have the escalation between India and Pakistan over the Kashmir territory. You have the saber rattling with Iran. You have the outright coup being staged in Venezuela. We talked about all of these problems a couple of podcasts ago. All the world's a stage. Trying to take a deep breath, looking back, seeing what's going on around the world. All of this stuff. Where are the tailwinds? These aren't tailwinds. These are headwinds. Any one of these could break in any one direction. And then there's always the unknowns. This is what we know. There's a whole host of unknowns. Something that could come out of right field. Something that could come out of left field. Something that could be staring us right in the face. But it's so obviously we're missing it. Could that be General Electric filing bankruptcy? We had a podcast on that a couple weeks ago. Check that out, and I will be doing follow-ups on that because I believe that could be a huge story. That will be Lehman Brothers-like if General Electric does file for bankruptcy or suffers some big financial hits, which would just be par for the course for them, unfortunately. These ramifications would be huge. And these are things that are out of the control of Donald J. Trump. These things are not his fault, which again is why it was a huge blunder, a huge mistake for this president and his administration to take ownership of the economy in the manner in which they have, and an even bigger mistake to take ownership of the stock market. I mean, you have to be an idiot, or you have to be so arrogant and so vain or egotistical or narcissistic to do so. That's the only thing that could justify it. Now, this thing sells off, which is more likely to do, in my opinion. You will have the president, he will not take responsibility for this. He will take responsibility for the record highs, but he will not take responsibility for the dips or any major sell-off. He will blame the Federal Reserve. He will blame China. He will blame other countries. And that's another thing, which is also par for the course, unfortunately, on this day of tweets and statements, because the United States is looking to sign a bilateral trade agreement with Japan. And during the G7 summit this weekend, Donald Trump obviously met with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan and said, in principle, we are going to be in agreement with a new trade deal. And, of course, the president can't just leave it at that. He has to go on. He has to make statements. He has to make some comments off the cuff. Of course, exaggeration, some of them perhaps outright lies, because there's contradiction from Japan on this. Because the president said, well, Japan is going to be making a handful of concessions. And, of course, the Japanese have come out and said no such concessions have been made. So who do you believe? Do you believe a sitting U.S. president, or do you believe the Japanese? Shouldn't even be a question. Shouldn't even be a question. But we have to question this every stinking day. I mean, the president can't help himself, does it on purpose, doesn't know better. I don't know which one it is. All of the above. Pick one. It makes no difference because the action is what the action is. And when you have the credibility of the president himself called into question, and more importantly, the office of the presidency of the United States called into question, we have a big problem, ladies and gentlemen. We've got enough problems as it is. This one could be completely avoided. Tell the truth, man, or keep your mouth shut. Because you don't need to represent the American people, making us all look like liars. That we have no credibility. That this is who we voted for. Have some sense of purpose. Have some dignity and some respect for the office. This isn't Trump Organization. This is the United States of America. Do something about it. So, deal or no deal? That's the question. I don't think there's going to be one. Not anytime soon. Why would China come to the table? Except just to make it look good, like we're talking. They're just going to play their game on the other side. I told you yesterday, guys, if China comes to the decision that they are willing to suffer an economic hit, that they are willing to go through maybe years of slower growth, but on the other side, if they think that they can join together and get together from a nationalistic sense of pride, patriotism, that says, you know what, our goal is to unseat the United States of America as the world's major economic power, that they're number one. We're going to be number one. If the Chinese say that and they're willing to take a hit, we're in trouble. We're in trouble because the mentality here in the United States, I don't think a lot of people would say, well, let's get behind President Donald Trump, and if we have to go through recession to make the Chinese feel some pain, that's what we're going to do. No. That's not what Americans are going to do. No way, no how. No way, no how. We need to have the new pair of sneakers. We got to have the best television set. We got to have the house we can't afford. We got to have the cars we can't afford. So there's no way Americans are going to say, all right, well, yeah, it's more important to beat the Chinese than it is to, I can't forego all those purchases of the stuff I can't afford that I don't really need. That's not what we're going to do here. And we saw that from the president. when he delayed tariffs past the holiday shopping season. Why? Well, just in case, folks, these tariffs actually hurt the U.S. consumer. No, Mr. President, that's not what you have been telling us for months. That is not what you have been telling us for months. You have said that these tariffs are not paid for by U.S. businesses. They are not paid for by the U.S. consumer. So why are you delaying them past the holiday shopping season? These are basic questions, folks. It's because we're being lied to. And enough is enough. Deal or no deal, that's small potatoes compared to what's really at stake. Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. Please like, share, subscribe, leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.